Uh, my name is Ammar. I am one of the hosts of Asians Represent, and I am also one of the cast members in Dungeons and Asians, and I'm kind of facilitating this discussion that we're having here, and I think we'll just go around and ask everybody to introduce yourselves, as well as say your pronouns, please, as well. So, Iza, please.
Hello, I'm Izza. My pronouns are she, her. I go by Evil Clever Dog on the internet. I am a TTRPG streamer and cosplayer and designer. I do many, many things and wear many, many hats. But today I'm here to talk about this book again. Again.
I think a witch cursed us. That's why we have to do this
Yeah.
forever. Sophia, please, you are new to the stream, so please give us a more in-depth introduction about who you are, what's your background, where you're coming from, what's going on.
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Sophia Dejan. My pronouns are she, her. I'm in Saudi Arabia, Eastern Province. Most of my time I'm a writer, or I'm trying to write, really. I'm also writing freelance. I started a community within the Eastern Province to try to find others that play tabletop gaming, primarily within D&D, and was thankfully able to find and reach out to a lot of people, primarily a lot of women too, which has been very fun to play with and have a female side to our community, and something that works for everyone and everyone's comfort levels. And through there, we've been able to host workshops and hold different things that help people get to know how to play tabletop gaming, and shown that it's pretty popular here too. Um, and I'm happy to be here, and happy to go through and understand different representations that may have taken place within this book, and lead to a more constructive creation of future ones.
Well, that's fantastic and noble. I do have to ask though, and you didn't. There was no homework to do, but did you get a chance to go through this book before?
I have actually. I haven't.
Okay.
So I have read up to where you've reached. Just about past.
Improving
Uh,
station.
just about past there,
Mm.
and I've stopped there, so that's where I am right now. So the new parts that we'll go through here are new to me as well.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, that's kind of we like to have something like fresh eyes to this. I also just realized I asked everybody else to pronounce. I did not say mine. My preferred pronouns are he, him. So very much looking forward to having your perspective on this, Sophia, as well. We also found out in the pre-stream chat that Sophia is currently in the town. Well, it was a town back then. Now it's a proper city that I was born in 30 plus years ago at this point. So small world. Mariam, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Miriam. I go with they, them pronouns, and you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie, and I usually live here in the interwebs. But I have two things that I'm super, super, super excited about. One is the Musafirs podcast is coming back with season 2, and we're actually recording a AMA tomorrow. So if there's any burning desire questions that you have to ask about the podcast, like, hey, who's playing? I mean, we announced that. But like, what's going to happen? Are you using a new system? All of those things, or anything. Just shoot me or the Musafirs podcast Twitter a DM. And also, Utopia is going to be early March, going to be starting their new like startups, their shows, new seasons, stuff like that. I don't want to get into too much of that because there's going to be a proper rollout, but just it's like, hey, we're coming back in March. It's happening.
Foreshadowing.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Amr, please introduce yourself.
Hi. I'm Ramirez. I use they, she pronouns. I've got not much to announce right now because I'm going to do that mysterious thing where I say I can't talk about my projects. Is it NDAs? Is it because they're too early for me to be comfortable talking about them publicly? You won't know. But other than that, I generally do tabletop writing. I do podcast appearances and occasionally streaming like this one. Yeah. I was recently, actually, there's one thing I can talk about. I was recently on the Protein City podcast where I played a very fun game of Masks. So you can go check that out. That's it. That's all I got. Very simple.
Cool. Isa, would you like to give us the content warning? Got into some heavy topics in this thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, so from the lovely intros to the serious shit, we just want to give a broad content warning for potential discussions of racism, Islamophobia, sexism, honor killings, and classism. These are topics that seem to be coming up a lot in this book, so if they are something that you are particularly sensitive towards, then, you know, there will be a VOD of this going up on YouTube later, so you can revisit it at a later date, at a time that's more comfortable for you. And you don't need to worry about us because we take steps to take care of ourselves behind the scenes. So we're all good.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I mean, I think this is the 8th one, something like that. So I think we're going to sort of try to streamline the general approaches thing. Just as a brief thing, I try to come from the perspective of Edward Said's seminal Orientalism, and I'm big into sort of philosophical capital C charity because I was trained in that for too long. But I wanted to get Sophia to say a little bit more about your approach, please.
So my approach going through this, as with any content that is looking to represent Arabic culture, is try to see if it's something that can do some harm in some way, perhaps even if unintentional, but also if it can help others in understanding the culture, because it is how we learn from others, through fun material or through movies. But I do love history. So I'm always interested in picking things up, even for curiosity. So that's my approach to it: representation, but also, is it fun to play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely the two questions we've come to. And one thing that I really appreciate and like with this panel, though unfortunately we're down Ahmed, who got married, and Adam Ali, who was a little overwhelmed, is the different perspectives and from different parts of the tabletop role-playing game process. So of course we've got, you know, Ammar on the maths as well as many other things. I know Mariam and Sophia have done a fair bit of writing as well in the TTRPG space, so that's also really exciting to get a sense of how to maybe potentially kind of redeem this work a little bit. With that note, shall we dig right into it? Because last time we hadn't quite made it all the way through the station section. But we are at something that maybe is going to be good. It says improving stations. Not going to be good, is it? Oh, geez. Okay. Isa, would you like to, is there a sort of specific part that people wanted to jump in, or should we read through it? Because it seems like it was...
I mean, I think this whole section is sort of the mechanics of how a station actually works. So should we read through the whole thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can sort of, yeah, breeze through that. Isa, would you mind, you're first in the initiative order, just to say, sure, clockwise in the overlay, so.
So the next section is improving station. In gameplay, characters can improve their station in two ways: by bettering their reputation, which is represented by experience level, or by acquiring and spending money. Oh boy. Experience. As soon as a character's experience level exceeds his or her initial station, the station improves to equal the experience level. When the character attains a new level, station increases another level too. For example, Hashim's station is 6. When he reaches 7th level, his station automatically becomes 7. Thereafter, his experience level and his station are the same, not including bonuses for spending money as explained below. At their highest levels, adventurers may rival great sultans and khans in the respect which they command. If characters should lose experience levels, their station drops accordingly to a minimum equaling their current position, their original position, sorry. Money. Characters can also improve their station temporarily by spending money. For every 1,000 gold pieces spent each month in parties, gifts, sumptuous clothes, and other impressive displays, an individual's station is increased by 1 point. Throwing coins to the masses while riding upon a richly outfitted stallion can be an effective ploy. At any rate, it worked for Aladdin. This social bonus applies to only one character. This social bonus applies to only one character. Members of a group must spend money individually to raise their stations. The bonus lasts until the money runs out, at which point a character's station returns to normal. Do we want to pause there and discuss anything, or should I keep reading?
Yeah, let's... Oh, no. Ammar, you're shaking your head, so I take it...
I don't know if there's anything beyond what has already been discussed in the previous one on Station. It's just sort of reinforcing the idea that the biggest things in Station are accomplishments, which are deemed worthy, aka adventuring, and money, right?
Yeah.
money spent for extravagance more so than it is spent for the sake of doing something useful with it.
Yeah, and I feel like that imagery of, you know, throwing coins to the poor peasant masses is just reinforcing that like classic idea of sort of like this really classist view of like the kind doting lord or whatever who is really good to his underlings, and I am very uncomfortable with that image sort of being in there.
And that's directly from Aladdin, the
Yeah.
animated card. Like literally, they're just taking the thing.
Actually,
Yeah.
there's
And
one.
the sudden mention of let's say another fantasy content like going to Aladdin out of nowhere is kind of just jarring when you're trying to visualize and only imagine one setting.
Also, I think we found out that Aladdin isn't of Arab origin. It might be sort of a reskin of a Chinese story, something like that.
It's
that's
very, yeah, the original story is set in China, but the story itself has like a lot of potential origins of like where it actually came from, and it was added into the 1001 Nights by a French translator, so it's quite contentious, basically, not really known.
It's not as clear cut as like it seems to be, but yeah, it's one of those things where I think the term used in Arabic is to the east, and some people argue that that is specifically the language used, I forget the specific one, for China, East Asia. Some people just argue it is generally east, so it could be even South Asia or just like other Arabian countries further east of where the story was told, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so this mechanizes those things. The other thing I wanted to mention here, just before we move on, is the idea about losing your rank, or sorry, your level. This was something I actually just started playing a home game of 2E, which I'd never played before, and so it's really interesting to see how it plays. One of the things that is super unfun, which is why they kind of stopped doing it, is that it's super easy to lose your level in the game, which, you know, I get it, but like it really just seems to just like, you know, if you lose a level, you lose your station, which is directly influenced by how everybody else in the game universe refers to you or coordinates with you. So it's just like really brutal, which is just, I don't think that much fun, which I they changed it.
Yeah, I know we talked about this last time, but just briefly, like basically this mechanic being here and like mechanizing a system of class privilege encourages that kind of behavior at the table, which I think is very uncomfortable, and also means that it's reinforcing this idea of like only privileged people get to speak and be influential, which in a D&D party shouldn't be the case, because everyone should have, like, regardless of like charisma stats, everyone should have the opportunity to be like involved in a place and a story.
I think it can be fun to include a mechanism that allows for station, but it shouldn't be just all power and glory and do this and you get things. It should include a negative element to it as well, for it to be balanced. So those of lower station have some upsides to it, and those of higher station do have some downsides too. So just so people can play it out, and how rigid it can be can depend on the DM and the table.
Yeah. As an optional rule, it's one thing. To make it the core of your system seems a little... I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, so actually one thing I did realize that might be interesting to talk about in regards to like the Aladdin narrative post here. I kept trying to say Aladdin and Aladdin at the same time, and the words like blended together into one bad pronunciation. But like, so specifically this is about how the idea of like charity being done, as rich people having so much money they can just throw it away to the poor. And I want to talk a bit about like wealth distribution in the early Arabian states, because I think that's an interesting historical point to compare. So I'm not too knowledgeable on pre-Islamic Arabia generally. I know a bit about like the Saudi Arabia area, Mecca, Medina, etc. And generally at the time, wealth was very concentrated in Mecca because it was a central point. The Kaaba was used as a central like pilgrimage site, and also Mecca was positioned as a central trade route. So a lot of people would travel through there. So specifically in the Quraysh tribe, they had a lot of the wealth. Post-Islamic Arabia, one of the key tenets of Islam is zakat, which is a form of charity tax, essentially, where you pay a certain portion of your wealth each year, each period of time. And that's an interesting point because at various points in the Islamic caliphates and Islamic empires, they were used to different effects. So like the early Islamic caliphs, Abu Bakr, Ali, somewhat Uthman, and then Omar, tended to use all the tax money that was given and redistribute it. Uthman started a sort of using it for himself and instituting nepotistic policies and giving it out to his family and pointing them to positions of power, etc. And then once you get to the Abbasid and Umayyad dynasties, you end up with a lot less of that and a lot more of like the tax money goes to the imperial power, and especially more so with the Ottomans. So there's an interesting history there of like, picture isn't quite accurate to most modern Arabian, to the period of Arabian history they're trying to replicate most. This is definitely, especially since you're drawing from Aladdin, you're drawing images that aren't quite accurate to that region that you were trying to replicate. Because I guess that's something I'd say.
I'd say the reference to Aladdin, the only thing that feels like it could be pulled from history is the story of Musa, who was known for causing, I guess, such a bubble in the economy because of how much he would donate as he would go through different regions on his way to Mecca. And
Yep.
that could be a reference to it instead of Aladdin. But I didn't quite imagine throwing gold in the street.
But Mansa Musa's situation was like he was donating as his religious pilgrimage, leaving wealth behind as part of this religious endeavor, not oh, look at me, money.
Yeah.
Not to mention the
precisely.
bodily harm that would come from being hit by one of these golden missiles.
Fantastic. Sophia, would you like to read the next little bit on losing station there?
Losing station. Characters can lose station in 3 ways during play: through criminal actions, sudden poverty, and by having the misfortune of becoming slaves. Criminal actions. Characters found guilty of a major crime quickly earn a despicable reputation that follows them wherever they go. Some are even branded or marked in some way as punishment. Yet, even if the criminals show no physical signs, nearly all who see them will recognize what they are and avoid them accordingly. Initial station is lost, replaced with a level of just 1 or 2, 1d2. Pennilessness. Woe is the pauper in the land of fate. Characters reduced to begging have a station of 3 immediately, even if their destitution is the result of a recent robbery or a temporary setback. I left my purse on another plane of existence, but I know a genie. The penniless condition is reversed once such a nouveau pauper has cleared all outstanding bills or loans and has money equaling 500 gold per level. Then former station is returned. Enslavement.
Sorry, just if I could, I think we may have missed the content warning at the top of the show. I do want to mention that we are about to get into. I know we already mentioned enslavement, but want to mention. Sorry for that. Please go ahead, Sophia.
Yep, it's already added, and it will be on the YouTube video if you are watching it.
Great.
Thank you.
Enslavement. Characters who are enslaved have a station directly linked to their masters. If they are later freed by some means, such individuals regain 1 point of station each month until they attain their former levels. And there seems to be a reference of a table for this later.
Yeah. Oof.
This was rather heavy.
Yeah. Welcome to the stream. Now, I think I felt similarly when I hadn't read ahead either, and then I read a chunk of the honor section for the first time, and they got into honor killing, and I was like, oh God, I should have read ahead. So it's awful. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know if we need to say too much about this section, other than I think perhaps it's self-evident.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing is you can gain level despite any dastardly action you do, depending on the campaign setting, of course, and the table and the comfort. So you could gain a level because you killed someone, but then how does that affect your reputation and how you lose the station? So that sort of thing is, at least it comes into play here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the pennilessness one is, again, just like completely reinforcing the stuff we've said before about how this is an incredibly classist mechanic to be in this game in the first place. Like being poor or losing your money through no fault of your own instantly makes you a less important person.
There's
and then, sorry.
There's some incongruence in the world building from like the first bits, which seems to portray a very hospitable, almost egalitarian society at the start, right? Like they're like, this is, in some ways, this is better than the Forgotten Realms. There's no racism between different species and different people. People are really hospitable. If you need support, they will give it to you. People are bound by their honor to help one another. And yet there's this level of judgment and looking down on someone that turns it from, oh, I will be hospitable to anyone who needs it, to, oh, this poor person's station is so low, I must help them, right? It reframes the good that was done before in a unfortunate way.
Yeah, which also, I
Savior way.
think, yeah, I was about to say, reinforces the things we've brought up before about how white saviory this entire book feels so far. Or, you know, upper class saviory, if you want to put it that way in this case. Yeah, it feels like very contradictory as well, considering how much emphasis they put on the hospitality section, that they then would turn around and be like, yeah, you just, you know, lose all your social station if you just happen to, you know, not make enough money that month or whatever.
Sorry, I think Mariam was trying to get in there.
So for me, as someone who is very financially illiterate, and just looking at so far the how you can gain station and lose station, it seems to me that if you are not excessively wealthy, by increasing your station, you could in fact just be losing your station momentarily. Just from reading it from a mechanic standpoint of like how you gain and lose. And it just, I don't know, it feels like a very grindy, boring mechanic as a whole. And two, this just the moral implication just feels very too real, and even more real now than say the 90s.
I figured it out. Station is just credit score.
Something else I just want to make note of with the enslavement section. This mechanic is here to be used for player characters, so therefore the enslavement section being here implies that player characters can become slaves, which is a whole other problematic issue that you know, the fact of slavery being here as a topic in the first place, and then also, you know, going into stuff like player character autonomy and agency in general, but also then specifically related to a topic that is very, very harmful and difficult to talk about. And they've just, again, thrown it into this book to be used as a mechanic in such a tiny little section that doesn't go into any of the implications of that whatsoever, although maybe it's a better thing that they didn't do that, frankly. But yeah, again, this is something where I feel like I'm constantly asking why this is here and how anyone would enjoy using it at their table.
I think on a point on why this is here, for me, I can see a situation where a mechanic like this, not specifically similar to it, can be fun if and only if it seems to be feeding directly into the story. Meaning that maybe the characters are in a situation where this is something that they are fighting against, and this is something that they're looking to avoid from their past, and it directly is important to the main story and could be done in a way that's a bit more flexible, that is more focused on less detail but rather more implications of decisions made. It can be fun that way, given, of course, everyone's consensually up for a game that has these elements, but without it being immensely important to the main story, if it's just, this is the world, it's not so much fun.
Yeah, and there are games that do attempt to tackle those issues. Like a big one I think of off the top of my head is Spire, where they do make the differentiation and say like, this is indentured servitude in this world, and we don't necessarily want to ourselves draw the parallel between this and slavery in the real world. But that story is potentially there to explore if it's at a table where people feel comfortable doing that. I'm not saying that everyone would succeed at that, but the game and the rule book takes care in the way in which it talks about it and the implications that it has, whereas here I don't think that the right care has been taken over the topic.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the things I would say about slavery for a second is slavery is a historical thing that happened, and when we say slavery, especially within the context of the US, and which makes it usually, unfortunately, the context of the world, because that tends to dominate discussions, because that's how hegemonic power works, we think of chattel slavery, we think of the cross-Atlantic trade slave, we think of the mass enslavement of Black people from Africa. But slavery happened historically across the world beforehand, and the slavery that happened tended to be of a different form than chattel slavery. That doesn't mean it's not slavery, that doesn't mean it wasn't horrible, but it takes different form and it happened, and it gets overshadowed because of the sheer atrocity of chattel slavery. And so talking about that slavery is important, because slavery happened in the Arabian world. It happened across classes. It happened sometimes people being sold into slavery, sometimes people sold themselves into slavery to overcome debts. A lot of times it mirrors the sort of situations we have under capitalism of essentially like being forced to sell yourself to pay out a debt, being forced to sell out someone close to you in order to like contract yourself out to a person for X period of time until you pay off your debt and you're functionally their slave until that time ends. Those happened in a lot of countries and continued to happen until relatively recently. There was slavery, I know, in Egypt until relatively recently, until the past 100 years or so. And so it's a thing that happened, and it's worth not erasing. It is also not a thing that needs to be in your role-playing games, unless you were specifically, like Sophia said, telling that story. And I would add, you probably shouldn't be telling that story unless you're one of the people affected by said history. 99% of the time, that is not your story to safely explore, to set up the framework to explore, unless you are specifically from that group. I'm blanking on the game, but there was a really good game specifically built around this topic by a Black author. I'm just blanking on it right now, but that's one of the first like story games to hit at emotional topics that is really good for this. If I remember the name, I will bring it up later.
I think also, oh, sorry.
Oh, but yeah, go ahead. I think that's it.
Oh no, I was gonna say, like, I completely agree with you, and like, to add to that as well, I think the fact is that in most people's minds nowadays, when you say the word slavery, the transatlantic slave trade is the first thing that's going to come into their head. And you're absolutely right that these other forms of slavery did exist in this part of the world. But I feel, again, like the book hasn't done enough to make people break from that immediate assumption that they will make, and the immediate discomfort that will come with that being a very like raw topic for a lot of people. And I absolutely agree with you about every other point you made. But just to add that in there, that like, I think we've brought this up a couple of times before, where there are words that have particular associations to most people these days, and they haven't done enough care to differentiate between those two different things.
If I may close on the most, I guess, charitable note about this, the silver lining is, as far as I could, if I recall correctly from the previous, and I did read ahead a bit this time, this is kind of an isolated bit. Like enslavement isn't something that's deeply integrated into every other thing, like, you know, like station is. And so at a table, you could just say, okay, there's just never going to be any conversation about slavery because we're playing a fantasy game, and why would I want to do that? So that's the only silver lining I can think of, is it's easy to ignore if you don't want to have it in your game, but why was it in the game in the first place?
I think Valor Austin in the chat just brought up an important point as well, which is they've got to say it's certainly noteworthy that white creators seem to jump at the opportunity to portray vile slavery when writing books for other cultures, while remaining conspicuously silent on slavery associations within their own default cultures, which, yeah, absolutely. That's the thing we see time and time again with this book, is like the representations of like vile sexism and violence towards women only appears in Al-Qadim and not in other settings. And the same here with this issue of slavery.
Yeah, definitely. The exoticization of the other that goes so deeply in with Orientalist works, definitely there. And sort of also makes you wonder what kind of wish fulfillment the authors or the people who want to play in that system are going for, if this is what they want to do in a world in which they don't face the same kind of consequences.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got the game name. It's called Steal Away Jordan. It is a game about slave narratives explicitly written by I believe a Muslim black woman. And it is it is an old game. It is one of the first games to try to tackle heavy topics, I think, that in a more like public sense. There's a more revised edition that's pretty recent. Check it out. Yeah, thank you for dropping the link, Daniel, in chat. But yeah, if you want games that hit that topic, there are games that do that in proper, respectful, thoughtful ways by folks who are affected by those tales. So play those games. Don't just throw it randomly into your game, because slavery, historical accuracy.
Let's be edgelords.
Yeah, shall we move on? I'm sure we could talk about this for the rest of this stream, probably the next two. But I think TLDR, slavery is bad. Don't just put it into your game. Don't throw it in. It seems like a bad thing to throw in. Shall we read the next section on masking one's station, or can we do a quick just overview of that? Yeah, sounds like we could probably read it. I think, Mariam, would you like to take the next little bit?
Sure. Masking one's station. Station is as much a part of men and women as their skin, their hair, and their souls. It is revealed by their choice in clothing, their gestures, their walk, their accent, and their word choice. 100 small and subtle things declare a person's station to the world, and all Zakharans seem to have an innate ability to sense them. In gameplay, however, this doesn't mean that characters cannot mask their station and pretend to be better or worse than they truly are. Even in the Arabian Nights, there are tales of beggars who work their way into palaces of great caliphs by pretending to be foreign princes, and stories of kings who disguise themselves as commoners to find out what their subjects truly think of them. Concealing one's station usually involves the disguise proficiency. Characters who make a successful proficiency check have passed as whatever station they're pretending to be. Failure indicates that their cover has been blown, with results suited to the situation at hand. In the case of a king who pretends to be a beggar, his audience may play up to his vanity, telling him what he wants to hear. In the case of a beggar pretending to be a foreign prince, being thrown out of the palace is the least damaging of possible scenarios. Even characters without the disguise proficiency may be able to mask their true station. In lieu of a proficiency check, these characters make a station check, also a d20 roll. Individuals whose station is 10 or less must receive a result less than their station to succeed. Characters with a station of 11 or higher must receive a result higher than their station. In other words, it's easiest for those in the middle ground to pretend to be their betters or lessers. DMs may require station checks every time station comes into play, in gaining entrance to an area, to being introduced to others, while dining, and so forth. Note that certain spells and magical items may reveal the true station of an individual, regardless of checks. The same is true of a Hakima's or wise woman's special ability to pierce the veil of untruth.
So
I suppose when they said that station is part of the soul and there's magic that can tell that, maybe it was a little bit more literal than I anticipated.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel like this is a place where we're really seeing like an actual example of how this would work in an active game. And to me, I'm listening to this and thinking, this is all stuff that sort of happens anyway. Like you would disguise yourself if you needed to anyway. You would use a magic item to reveal the identity of someone if you needed to know their real identity anyway. So why is there a whole new problematic mechanic dedicated to it? Is my basic thoughts from that section.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is tied to perhaps the style in which the older D&D books were written, whereas the new ones, they don't really go into as much scenario possibilities, and they just leave it up to the DM.
I think for me the weird clash is that like if this is a thing that is written into your soul, is that only true while you are in Zakhara? Like once you leave Zakhara, does the station leave your soul and emerge from your body, finally freed from the confines of
Yeah.
the arbitrary borders of Zakhara?
No, we
Like-
don't do that in Faerun. Don't worry about
it's weird 'cause,
it.
like, before it was this weird cultural thing, and now it's a cultural thing because it is inherent to the soul. The other thing, like Issa said, so like real talk, there are this is the first paragraph that I'm like, this has bases that I see. Having lived in Dubai, the aspect of people will judge you based on how you present, how you wear, what car you drive, is very true in a lot of Arabian cultures in modern day, at least, and probably historically. But you know where else that's true? Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Have you watched a heist movie? Have you watched any single heist movie? It always starts with the criminal dressing up fancy to go get into a place where they haven't. Go watch Lupin.
Yeah.
Lupin's on Netflix right now. It's fantastic. It's beautiful. The first heist he does, he dresses up fancy to get into an auction, and no one questions him because he dresses up fancy because
Yeah.
they judge you
And
based on
the
how you dress.
attitude.
I'm literally doing that exact scenario in a home game right now, and we didn't have to use a super problematic station mechanic to do it. We just have characters with disguised self and got some new clothes and came up with names. Like it doesn't require this whole like faff that they've created for it.
Yeah, I really think if this was if this was to be rewritten within the new context of the D&D books, they probably wouldn't have that at all.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, for me, okay, like, I think the thing where it really got into my, like, it really got under my skin was the whole, like, the last paragraph specifically of revealing, like, okay, I get, like, especially having played D&D, that when you have these, like, truth or identifying spells where you get a lot of information about who you're trying to find out about, it makes sense that you see what their true form is. You know, maybe if alignments are in play, you kind of see the aura of their alignment or whatever. But a station is a very social thing, and it's very flexible and changeable by literally the previous pair of sections. So it's now making station something that is flexible and changing and very social, like socially based bioessentialism almost, and it just rubs me the wrong way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Do you remember the story in the previous section we read last time where the king recognizes his estranged children even though they were brought up by paupers and all the rest of it, basically implying that like if you are a prince or a princess, that is something that is like inherent to your soul regardless of whether you get separated at birth and are brought up by other people or something, and it's very uncomfortable. And also using the language of the veil of untruth, I feel, is also very uncomfortable. The idea of like ripping someone's veil off, just
That's a good point. I didn't consider that one. Amr, please.
I was gonna say, I think actually, so like, I don't know if we need to read the next section, but I think this is also in contrast to the next section, which essentially says some regions might have fixed station to the point where your station can't move, or even there's a caste system. That's the entire section summarized, right? And so, again, it's this weird thing where like they don't really bother to explain, or they seem not unsure whether it is a inherent thing or a social construct. If it's a social construct, is there some sort of social magic that like makes truth in the world? That's super freaking cool. Why aren't we talking more about that? Right? Like, why is that not like the only cool thing here is like people are all believing this thing and therefore it gets written into your soul. This thing is awful. We shouldn't have this thing. But that's kind of cool, but that's not really what's happening. They just seem unsure of what's going on. I don't know, is there anything anyone wants to say more about the section before I quickly bring up the next section?
I'm good.
The one thing that's
the only thing
interesting
about it
in the
is-
next.
Oh, sorry. If I could just jump in with that, just to kind of close off that last section a little bit, is, I mean, who among us hasn't had the party bard pretend to be some sort of royalty or whatever to get into a thing? That's a time-honored tradition. We don't need to have like a whole mechanic around station and like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try to be of a minimum station 5, and then I'm gonna. That seems a little too overspecified to me. Yeah. So maybe we can, that was an excellent summary of the next section, I think, Amr. And I'd also like to talk about the artwork when we get to it.
Yeah, we can jump back to that, and I'd be down to read starting from a name because I don't think there's much worth reading in this next section. But the only thing that I think is worth talking about is specifically they talk about a caste system, especially in the last paragraph. And they say players aren't forced to abide by this if the DM chooses to include it, but however, others might not approve. This
They made that optional and not slavery.
No, but it's like the GM can include it. The players don't have to follow it, but then the GM via NPCs is going to penalize you quite greatly. So it's like, well, then it's not optional.
Yeah.
um and and the thing there is like, so to an extent I get it, because it's actually one of the first few areas where again we see something that can be used in play, because this is a tension hook, right? That's what this is. They're putting a way you can create drama in play. You have this caste system, your players are rebelling against it, tension, drama, plot hooks, but it's doing so through an Orientalist framework, right? I don't think we have much more to add. Where again, similar to slavery, if you're including caste systems, you're including it. You know, if Mariam included a caste system in Musafirs, for example, that would be specifically because we would be talking about it in the context of a South Asian fantasy storytelling world where we're going to talk about it honestly and deeply, right? If there was a place in Stars Amin that had that, it was because Mariam made a conscious decision to include that, put in the work to make it a safe environment to interact with, probably provided a ton of tools to GMs and players. And that's what you have to do when you do a thing like this, right? It's not just, oh, the DM can throw in a caste system anywhere. It's like, okay, if we're going to include a caste system in our game, is this a thing we're all comfortable with? Is this a story we're all equipped to handle emotionally and tell properly without hurting one another? Is this a story for our home game? Is this a story for a stream? Right? Things like that. That's it.
Yeah.
Let's do art.
Yeah, I think that covered summed it up pretty well. I mean, as somebody who comes from a culture which has a caste system, even today, don't put it in, just ignore it, or make it a super optional rule. Don't do the halfway optional thing where apparently the players are just doing something the GM doesn't want them to do or something. That doesn't seem like a fun game. Yeah, what do we think of the art? It took me a moment for anybody who didn't catch this, that there is a person, a sinister figure with what appears to be a dagger on the left side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was
yeah,
gonna
they
say,
blend so well.
yeah, I think we mentioned this with another piece of artwork before, because these are like inks, and because of the style, it can be quite difficult to actually discern like costume design and like blocking of the scene and stuff like that. I think there are elements here that do evoke certain sort of cultural things. Like, for example, the man who's sneaking away back there, like the helmet he's wearing is quite similar to what I've seen of like sort of Persian and Islamic helmets. And the woman holding the bird on her arm, like what I presume is possibly meant to be like a Middle Eastern hunting falcon, and it's wearing like a helmet that I have also seen like depicted in that kind of scenario before. And like her trousers and everything, like the flow of the fabric. There is an extent to which I feel like it's just sort of resting on like a generalized depiction for like a lot of the other elements, but there are some elements here that I quite like as well. So I do want to say that we don't want to be negative all the time.
Indeed.
Can I just say with the pants, and this is from someone really trying to draw sort of shalwars and kind of I wish there were a better English term, and but like harem bands, is that when unless someone's blowing wind up and down her trousers, it does not stay that way.
Hey, it could be a shalwar of billowing.
Yeah, I suppose so.
It's just naturally billows. But yeah. I think the art is trying to depict something a bit of some lavishness to it, because you have the fountain, you have the dressing. While I don't understand what each of the elements are meant to be, such as you mentioned the guy in the back that looks sinister, and then the man who's kind of whispering down there. I always like when art has a bit of a footnote explaining something, like just a little bit. So that's something that I find myself looking for. Okay, I want to understand this one. Where's the footnote? But I do like the general art of it, but without context, it's kind of hard to know what it's meant to represent.
It feels like a very 101 art piece, right? Like the Arabian hunting falcon, good. You know, the armor styled shalwar kameez, the general flowing outfits, pretty positive. I'm very confused by the background set piece, and part of it is the ink and black and white drawing, but like the use of the fish motif in the fountain doesn't resonate with any cultural elements I know of.
Mm.
I could be wrong. Like there's obviously I have limits to my knowledge, but the entire background set piece, except for the dome top that we briefly see in the top left tower in the back, there could be a very generic set piece to me, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly a pretty accurate explanation of most of what we see in this book. On the surface, it draws on our Arabian elements, often through an orientalized lens, and then when you dig any bit deeper, it just kind of starts not being that.
Yeah, I was curious about the depiction of the fish on the fountain because that wasn't something I'd ever seen before, but I also know that my knowledge is very limited in some areas, so I was curious as to whether that was a thing, but maybe it's not. If you're saying you don't recognize it, I don't know if anyone else recognizes it as a thing.
Yeah,
I feel like
South Asian
maybe
fountains don't tend to have the ones that I've seen anyway, or read about, or seen pictures of. I don't think have fish in them. That's not a thing.
I've
the
actually
fish.
seen fish fountains in not in Dubai City, but I think it was when I was driving in the Northern Emirates. So fish fountains are there, but if it's not necessarily in that way, and also it's of more localized fish, but I don't
Right.
know enough, like, and also a fantasy setting, so I can kind of be a little more forgiving of
Yeah.
the fish depicted.
Mhm. I feel like given its placement in the book, like maybe this is meant to depict some sort of secret meeting between like a princess and a poor man who wants to woo her, given the reference to Aladdin and the station section we've just read. Like maybe that's what it's meant to be, and the man behind there is like a guard who's trying to find the guy. But that's just me making like a whole load of assumptions about what it's
I
meant
think
to be
that's actually
because I'm
pretty
not
accurate.
sure.
It's got a romantic tryst vibe to it, right? Like that's what
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I was just sort of biased by the word harem that was thrown around earlier. Is that could be one of the things here, is that the person in the back. I mean, now we're just riffing off to come up with a scenario hook based on this picture, which is kind of fun because that's what we like doing in tabletop
Hey,
role playing
maybe-
games. Is
I
telling
mean, that's what
stories.
archers do. So that's
Maybe
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
the little silver lining of, hey, it's actually evoking a couple of ideas off the bat by staring
Yeah.
at it.
Oh, these are bad ideas.
I didn't say they were good or bad. I just said they're evoking ideas.
Yeah, I just meant, of course, depending on which era and which of the various dynasties you're looking at, there was often a jealous guarding of the harem by the person. So the person in the back, who does seem to be, they're wearing a helmet. It seems like maybe they're one of the palace guards or something. And the man in the front is perhaps trying to woo one of the women of the sultan or something. I said that were bad.
I mean, she is veiled, and she is pulling the veil across her face bashfully, so you could be right.
Oh, that's what that is.
Oh,
I
I
think
thought it
that's-
was cling wrap.
Yeah, again,
Yeah.
it's very unclear because of the style of the book, but I think that is meant to be her pulling a like sheer veil across her face, which is a whole thing we've discussed before about veils and stuff.
Maybe in the context of all this, the bird on her hand is familiar.
Yeah, it could be.
That'd be cool.
What's in a name? The names below, suitable for PCs and NPCs alike, are but a few of those known throughout Zakhara. There's then a list of male and female names. I'll get back to reading a couple of them in a minute, but I want to read the constructing a surname part first before just reading off a list of names. Constructing a surname. One of the most popular forms of Zakharan surnames combines the name of a place or location with the suffix -i. For example, Al-Kharji means the person from Kharj. Al means the, and may also be followed by a descriptive name, such as Al-Nisr, the eagle. In addition, El means El may mean the house of or the tribe of. Other Zakharan names are formed with a prefix, such as Ibn, Bin, Bint, Beni, Abd, Min, Abu, or Sit. Each has a different meaning. As prefixes, Ibn and Bin means son of, Bint means daughter of, Beni means the family of. So, Hatim ibn Abbas is literally Hatim, the son of Abbas. When someone refers to Hatim's family, the proper title is Beni Abbas. Abd means slave. As a prefix, it means slave of. Mamluk or Zakharan slave warrior commonly takes a name beginning with Abd followed by the name of his or her organization. Min means from. Zakharan priests favor this prefix, often linking it to the name of a venerated god or hallowed site, or simply to the name of a place. Abu, Sit are relatively uncommon prefixes. Abu means father of, and is often followed by the name of the person's first child, or more commonly, the first male child. Means mother of, and often precedes the name of the first child, or more commonly, the first female child. Roughly translated, Sit means lady, and is appropriate only for powerful or highly respected women. To give an example of some of the names, because I think they're really good and they also have a pronunciation guide, we have Asim, Ahmed, Akbar, Aliya, Alai, Anwar, Aziz, Diab, Juha, and for the female names, Aliya, Amsha, Aziza, Badiat, Bahja, Ghunayya, and a lot more. That's like a third of each list.
And to underline something is that last name that you said actually has that asterisk next to it, and if you look at that, it says the initial H is guttural, like the sound of a person gargling or gently clearing. This is what it actually says: is his or her throat, but obviously their throat.
Ghunayya, for example.
Exactly, which is a sound that doesn't. It's a phoneme that doesn't exist in English. So people who sort of are monolingual, or even I think in any of the romantic, that's not true. Actually, I think there's a sound that's close to it in French, maybe, and German, I think. But anyway, the point is, if you're English monolingual, that's a tough sound to make. But otherwise, yeah, that all seems pretty good. There's that asterisk at the end of the section I wanted to highlight, which just reads, Abdul is a variant of Abdal or Abdul. Meaning slave of the. It is nonsensical alone and is never a proper name, which I was a bit surprised by because I've known a few Abduls.
Same.
Yeah.
Although I will say that if it is a first name, it usually is followed like Abdul, Aziz, you know, like etc. etc.
And more commonly, you'd find it just referred to as Abdullah, Abdul Aziz, or so on. And usually, at least where I am, you wouldn't say Abdul alone. You might shorten the name to the second part, which is Aziz, or instead of Abdul Khalid, Khalid.
Ah, interesting.
Yep.
Okay. So that might be a cultural thing, actually, because I think in South Asia, it is sometimes just used as a proper name.
That could be just a loss of the meaning, right?
Yeah, it's more likely because I know that a lot of South Asian Muslims, they still stick with what is considered Muslim names, but it's really just sort of picking Arabic names to sort of signify you're Muslim.
Yeah, and also like one thing that doesn't get into here, but like Sophia mentioned Abdullah as a name, which means slave or servant of God, right? And that's one, like Abd here is presented in like the earlier slavery conversation, but also in certain contexts has like a more positive connotation. Like Abdullah is seen as a very religiously significant name to give someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I actually thought it was interesting that they're using Min to be the favorite name for priests instead of Abdul. Where I would have expected them to follow that same thing because names that begin with Abdul, the second prefix is a name of God. So I would have thought they might have kept that up in a way, but instead they're following with Min. So which works as well. It's just a different choice.
I mean, the biggest thing I can say about this is I could have written this section. I've written sections like this in a thing I've written when I wrote surnames. I've written a simpler section of this before. This is like. I can't give it a higher praise than like 90% of the way this is something I would have written.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. And for anybody who might just be listening as well, I do want to say next to each name, there is a little pronunciation guide as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So that's actually, you go,
Maria. I do have one question, which I feel like you might be able to answer, either Safia or is that, and this is something that has kind of like as a naming thing. I've noticed that there are names for women that are and then the name of their child. And it confuses me a little bit because I feel like a lot of times names tend to be the ones you're given at birth, barring what you change yourself. So it's like, how or why is it that women and then mothers have their names changed to be their children? I guess it's sort of like
yes, it's not just mothers, it's actually very common with both genders. So it's out of a sense of pride of naming someone after their firstborn, and most commonly it would be their firstborn son, if not son, then firstborn overall. And it happens with both genders. It is kind of it depends on the preference of the person, but it's very normal, widely accepted. You'd even find it used in workplaces where instead of saying someone's name, you'll say Abu and Surname. Even if someone doesn't have children, someone might refer to them with the name of their father. So Abu with father name, going with the idea that they're going to name their first son after their dad.
There are two things on that note. One is it's sometimes done as like a pride thing, sometimes done as respect for like the accomplishments of a child. But like even one of the most well-known names in Islam, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he is one of the most influential people in early Islam. He is one of the first rulers of, not rulers, one of the first caliphs who takes over leading the Islamic community post Muhammad's death. And he is a person known for so many stories, and yet he is known as Abu Bakr, right? That is the name he chooses to go by. He didn't choose to go by whatever given name he had at birth. And his full name is Abu Bakr Abdullah ibn Uthman. He has both an Abu and an Ibn in his full name. Other random thing, but like I've seen friends do a cute thing where they will announce they have a child by changing their Twitter display name to say like from whatever their name was to Abu Blank or Blank. I'm like, oh, I see what you did.
And I mean,
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think this might be sort of the least problematic introduction to the culture that we've seen so far. And so far as it goes into it like this section didn't have to, right? But it does go into, right? A lot of times names are in relation to your relations, which, like I said, is a fairly unproblematic introduction into the cultures and kind of draws you into what it's like to live in those cultures and what those cultures value, which is family relationships and familial relationships and tribal affiliations. And that's all good.
Yeah, it's nice to see a section in the book that feels respectful and feels like it could be utilized at the table well in a way that wouldn't bring any harm, I don't think.
I do like the section on naming. I think it adds a nice flavor where maybe a character can pick up on an NPC through this because of the whole naming style. And then one other thing that would be fun to add is also the fact that a lot of Arabic names, you can add in all your grandparents. So as far back as you want to go. So you would go with Ibn, father, Ibn, grandfather, and so on. And a character can just use that for fun.
Yep. We talked about this. I'm not sure if I talked about this on stream before, but like in Egypt, that's how we identify you don't have middle names. We have patrilineal name chain. So my legal name for identification purpose is my name, my dad's name, my grandpa's name, last name. When I had to fill out some forms for like very specific identification, they asked for 4 generations up. So I had to know my name, followed by my dad's name. And it's not listed as like Amr ibn blank, ibn blank, ibn blank, or whatever. It's just Amr, Ahmed, ... grandpa, great grandpa, great great grandpa. The most I've ever had to use officially is 4. I think I know up to 5 off the top of my head.
Yeah. And not to get on this high horse immediately, but of course, one of the legacies of colonialism, especially of South Asia, is the British, who were really enamored with the Romans, took their conception of how names should be organized and then tried to force everybody else that was under their domain to use those. But of course, different cultures do it differently. And even within cultures, it's not monolithic. So for example, this isn't true for everybody in South Asia, but my last name, and which is to say the last name of all of us, all of my siblings, is my dad's first name. And his last name was his first name, but he ended up changing that to be the name of his subcaste at some point as just kind of a thing he decided to do. So yeah, there's a lot of different naming conventions, which I think are super interesting, and they kind of bring you into a culture, especially if they're not trying to force you to be like, yeah, this is a first name, and then this is the last name, and this is a family name. It's like, yeah, this is how it's done over there. It's like, yeah, pretty cool.
Yep.
All right. So with that palate cleanser, shall we dig into the next bit?
I think there's like a couple more things I wanted to talk about
please.
here. Less to do with the specifics here, but more I think like will be interesting to our audience. One of the things to note with the pronunciations is that all of these and even the constructing of surnames, actually, to an extent, is written specifically with more traditional Arabic in mind as the dialect being spoken. The pronunciations here, like especially when you get to Jamil and Jamal, which would be in like Egyptian Arabic, Gamal, Gamil, for example, because we tend not to use the hard j in a lot of Egyptian Arabic. And I think an interesting note to have when you are looking into Arabic as a language and Arabic as a culture is to realize that it is less a language and more a language family. Like we technically refer to them as different dialects of Arabic: Egyptian Arabic, Masri, Khaliji, a bunch of different dialects in North Africa, a bunch of different Arabics like Lebanese Arabic, Syrian Arabic, Iranian Arabic. They're all different, and to the point where you can actually get issues where people do not understand one another. People will, especially when you get like the further apart you get, like the various North African Arabics can be difficult for native Arabic speakers who have never put in the effort to learn to understand, because they draw a lot more on different cultural influences. Lebanese Arabic has slang that redefines certain common words in Arabic. Like their word for milk, for example, is just completely different, and they use the word for milk for something else. That will be confusing if you're not aware of it, and can lead to communication issues. So it's less a single language and more a language family that can also affect these pronunciation charts. This Arabic that's spoken here is closer to the Arabic spoken in Saudi Arabia, UAE, countries in the region tend to stick closer to traditional Arabic with the heavier sounds and the heavier pronunciations. The other Arabic that you might hear if you ever listen to Arabic stuff, if you ever watched most Disney films except for one period where they switched, they translated it in Egyptian Arabic for the localization, because that tends to be seen as lighter, because you remove a lot of the kh and the kh sounds in Egyptian Arabic. It's instead of Ahmed, you do Ahmed. Instead of Jamal, you do Gamal. So a lot of the heavier sounds go away, and so it's seen more pleasing. Which obviously has a lot of
for you.
colonial and imperial implications, but that's why Disney tends to use Egyptian Arabic for its localizations.
Also, Egypt was a British colony in a way that some of those others were not. Sorry, yep. Mariam, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question of you. Is there a concept of like academic Arabic and sort of more colloquial? Because I know that with Urdu and Hindi and everything, and then there's Hindustani, which is like the common Hindi Urdu kind of mishmash of like there's the academic, what you learn in academia, what is taught in schools, and then you have the speaking colloquial. Does that concept also exist in Arabic?
Yeah, you do have Arabic Fusha, which you could say is the traditional Arabic that goes back to the origin of the language, and if someone can speak it very well, they can be understood with anyone else that speaks it well, and it can even translate to just about any of the different subcultures. And then you do have the more slang Arabic, which not only will differ by country, but even will differ by, you could say, origin of the person within the country. So, for instance, my family has some origins that can go back to the central of Saudi as well as Iraq. And so the slang that I may have, that my family will have, will be different from someone whose origins will trace back to Syria and other places.
To add to that, Lugha Arabiya Fusha is specifically the Arabic used in the Quran, which is the Islamic religious text. And so it is all written that. So it's since most of the countries that are, at least the ones I lived in, so I lived in Egypt, Dubai, and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and they all had mandatory Arabic and religion classes. So for the religion classes, you specifically learned in Lugha Arabiya Fusha, because that's what you would read in as well. And then the Arabic tended to be the same as well for state unification and standardization purposes. But then like any other class you had in Arabic, they just usually speak like the local slang or whatever dialect the teacher spoke of most often. So like sometimes you'd get 2 or 3 different dialects if you had teachers from different backgrounds.
I would explain why my Arabic, because I had compulsory Arabic for like grade 1 to 8, and each time I had to relearn it because our teacher would change.
That's I guess the British analog for that would be like the BBC English and the English that real people speak.
Kind of, but
kind of, but not
Imagine
exactly.
an even more bigger wedge.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
if you learn Shakespeare from grade 1, right? If you learn to write Shakespeare, or even like original biblical translations from like from old Bible translations written in like style of English, there's
Latin,
not
I guess.
as not necessarily Latin, but like kind of, but like, and that's why talking about the Quran can be a very complicated topic, is because it is written in an Arabic that is not colloquially spoken in most places, and so it always, any attempt to talk about it involves a level of translation. Even if you're translating it just to Arabic, you are still doing a translation from one
Right.
Arabic to another.
Right.
But also formal documents would have to be in Arabic Fusha. And so someone can be raised speaking Arabic, went to school fully Arabic, but if their Arabic Fusha is not practiced and strong, they may struggle with these official documents as well.
Oh, okay. So it's like maybe a class thing too then.
It's a bit harder than that, because you would find that at least my experience, it hasn't shown any commonality by class. If anything, it just depends on too many factors. The school you went to, your family, your cultural background. It's not just class.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is why I wonder, like, whether academic is kind of a better way of framing it, of like, you know, like legalese or something, versus what people would speak.
To an extent, yeah. It's also like, I'm also not as knowledgeable about it, but I wouldn't not be surprised if most academics also wrote in Arabic, in the language they're most familiar with. Like my grandpa was a professor, and most of the things he did was in Egyptian dialect in an Egyptian university. Even though I'm sure he probably was decent with Fusha. I don't actually know. I can't ask him because he's passed away now. But his writing isn't that, and he wanted me to read it because he knew it would be in a dialect that I can more comfortably read than Fusha. Like whenever I try to read stuff from the Quran, translation is a lot of effort. I have to cross-check translations, especially for words that are no longer in use in colloquial Arabic, because they're just not. They're words with, it's a lot. They're words that are more lost to us in terms of everyday usage, and we're doing our best guesses at like retranslating them or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Because of course, growing up, I had to recite the Quran, but I didn't understand any of it.
Yeah, neither did I. I always thought that my friends who were fluent in Arabic had a way easier time. It was like reading a book for them versus me. I'm just regurgitating what I see on the page.
Uses a similar script, but that's about it.
You'll find that for a lot of us, it was sort of the same. We might have an easier time reading the letters because we're more familiar with the specific letters and the stringing of letters, but the meanings of words aren't going to be as natural in every single word, because
I can read Arabic.
Yeah,
I don't understand a word of it. If you give me an Arabic passage, I will probably read it mostly correct, but if you ask me what does that say,
right, I'm saying that
it's a bit like French
how works the same for most speakers. And when someone in the chat pointed out that there's surprisingly little overlap between Fusha and the dialects, and that's more true depending on which dialect you're talking about. I think it's probably fair to say Khariji is the closest to Fusha in terms of pronunciation and some of the more formal language used. But any dialect, the further you get from Central Arabia, the more the Arabic dialect veers from Fusha. Lebanese takes a lot of French influences because of the history of French colonialism there. North African dialects also take some French influences, but a lot of indigenous influences because of the various indigenous and Amazigh cultures in that area.
And then on top of that, just to add more to the different cultures, even within Khalij, you could have a huge variety of accents. Like within Saudi, there are some accents I struggle to understand entirely.
Okay, this is super interesting, but I don't think this is the linguistics podcast. Do I want this to be the linguistics podcast? Because I want to learn so much more about this. But sorry, so the distinction is there a Wikipedia page for, is it Fusha?
Fusha, F-O-S-H-A, I believe.
F-O-S-H-A. Okay, so yeah, people who are interested, look that up. I will definitely look it up later. Because this is super, super interesting to me, because I got into linguistics last year. Or
F-U-S-H-A seems to be one of the other spellings. Yeah. F-U-S-H-A. Yeah.
I feel like maybe a wrap up at some point.
This is my knowledge on Arabic linguistics. Like, I think we've exhausted 90% of what I can say about this stuff.
Okay, well then I'll throw one in there. Does the phoneme, the P phoneme, does that exist in all, does that not exist in all Arabics, or is it like in some Arabics you get the P? Because my sense growing up in Saudi Arabia was that they didn't have the P phoneme, so they couldn't make it. So they often
Which-
substituted B.
Yeah, we just have B.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of words, and that's why like one of the trademarks of like an Arabic accent is saying P letters as B sounds.
Okay, so that's all the linguistics knowledge I think that I have. So that was really cool, though. That's I like that. I feel like that could have been an entire chapter in this book. I'd read it. Shall we move on, or do folks want to have say a little bit more? All right. Okay. So we'll try to tackle. We'll probably do the introduction to character kits, and then that might be it. We'll do some reflections, and then that would be it for this month, I think. So I did get a chance to go through this before. For those who might not be familiar, the character kit, what's called character kits in 2E, is a bit like backgrounds in later editions, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me if that's the case. And so that's what they sort of call it here. I'm sort of the main thing that I think we wanted to highlight on that first page about character kits that's probably up on Twitch right now was just that they do this thing which again they've done a few times in this like what game is this? So they really, there's a section here where they just say most of the kits are designed for native Zakharans, which are the recommended roles for new PCs. However, within each group of kits isn't one that's appropriate to foreigners. And so that's kind of this thing that they've done throughout this entire book is like, do you just want to bring your own character from Faerun over here and then do the stereotypical Orientalist pillaging and just, murder hobo in a culture and just kind of enjoy that? Or do you want to like live and, do you want to create a character who actually lives and is native to this setting or not? And they kind of continue to confuse the issue. That was the main thing that stood out to me about this just first section here.
I feel like whenever there's a campaign that's exploring a land that is looking at a culture that exists in our world, I think it should be approached carefully whether to play a foreign character or to play a character from the location. And that should be a conscious decision rather than something you just do. So if you're playing someone foreign, that's all and well. Maybe you want to look at it as just exploring. But it should be kind of looked at in that way. If you're playing someone who's native, which I feel is way more fun because you can delve in and be part of that world. So I like, if I were given any kind of setting, I'd always want to be native from there. So.
And from a game, sort of like a setting designing, sort of setting writing experience, and this is very early on for Surname at least, is I had the same concerns, but I think like what made me come to the decision I did was that I focused too much on who's going to be primarily playing this game, and two, making them feel comfortable rather than sort of being like, nope, I've made this world to be played in. You don't get to be a foreigner in here. You have to be a part of this culture. Otherwise, what is the point? And I scrapped the foreigner background and community. I was just like, nope, because this story is not about the foreigners. It's about the natives. It's about this world. If you're going to play this game, it's because you want to be here.
Yeah, because you want to be front and center. You want to be part of the action, part of the consequences, all these things. So it just seems like the more fun option.
Yeah, and I can see some white players, maybe well-meaning white players, being concerned that if they play a character who is, say, a Zakharan, for example, of being problematic and doing problematic things with that character and wanting to be and not wanting to do that and wanting to at least be aware of it. And so maybe they choose to play a foreigner for that reason. That of course then opens you up for the white savior trope that we've discussed many times. But I guess then the point would be like, if that setting were respectfully written and created, like I'm sure Mariam's is, and like this one for the most part isn't, sadly, then you would be supported by the text in portraying a character respectfully and in not doing problematic things. So that's
safety tools
and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Also, I want to point out real quick that Ting in the chat points out that they sort of function a little bit like subclasses do in 5e or variant classes do in Pathfinder, if you're familiar with them. They give you weapon proficiencies, non-weapon proficiencies, magical abilities sometimes, and other options. So they're not just backgrounds. They've got a little bit more meat to them than just that.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, I think they also affect your station.
Yes.
Which, so yeah, they do have quite a big mechanical impact if you are using the station mechanic.
And a bunch of them are derived, as we'll sort of get into them. A bunch of them are derived from, I guess, historical analogs. So again, it ends up being a really weird mishmash because they'll have like, all of these are from vastly different eras and vastly different communities and societies, but there's like a diversity there too, so it's kind of a balance in some ways. I think somebody highlighted something on the first page right at the bottom, but I think that we probably don't need to go on about it, but we did. I think somebody wanted to mention that it does say at the end that an outland warrior would draw a great deal of comment as well as outright stares from the, quote, veiled women of Sahara, end quote. Actually, that whole thing was a quote, but yeah, that bit. They probably could have skipped that.
I think my new drinking game is now how many times they say veiled rather than exotic, or do we just add them all together?
No, it's a bingo card
Yeah.
of words.
Oh, Marduk. I'm sure somebody is making a bingo card, but if you're not and you're watching this, please make a bingo card, tweet it at us.
Yes.
That would be amazing. Jeez.
There are some sections though that we did want to read. We want to continue on covering those.
Yes.
'Cause I think there's some interesting things to talk about in those. And starting with requirements on page, whatever that page is, the second page.
Yes.
And kit descriptions, right?
And kit description. So yeah, I was kind of thinking, quick kit descriptions. So I think I'm next in the initiative order. So I will go ahead and do this next bit. So requirements was the section that stood out to me, which is who's requirements, who's eligible for the kit and who's not. For example, the Hakima or wise woman must be female. When both males and females are allowed, an optional feminine title may appear along with the unisex name. For example, a Faris is a male or female holy warrior. For ease of use, we've applied the Arabic masculine form to both genders. Okay, maybe you could have done that, whatever. However, some female characters prefer the traditional title Farisa, as do some players who wish to add more flavor to their games.
I think this is the first acknowledgement that a POC woman might join your game.
Yeah.
That's a little bit that I highlighted because I wanted to talk about it because that's a general thing we'll see come up a few times, though not as frequently as I had been expecting. That was something that I was a bit pleasantly surprised by after being braced by this section. It's like, oh my God, every background is going to be like gendered, and it turned out most of them weren't. And in some ways that was ahistorical, but again, historicity isn't what this is about. So
yeah,
it's about fantasy. So yeah, that's fine. And it's better.
The translation of holy warrior here is a little wonky, because Faras means horse, and Faris is just a horse rider, a knight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize for my pronunciation of that.
No.
I don't speak Arabic. Of course, growing up, Ammar means builder apparently, but Hamar means I believe donkey or ass.
That was the term of endearment my Arabic teachers gave me.
Really?
Yes.
I was bullied with it, so
I was
that's
being
the extent
polite.
of my Arabic anymore.
I was being polite.
That's also an interesting cultural thing, like the way it's used in different Hamar is one of those words that is like it's one of those flexible insults where you can use it endearingly and or as an insult,
right?
So like I like my mom jokes around with it with like me and my sister as like a very endearing joke whenever my sister says something slightly like mean or whatever. But
I bet like maybe like you big dummy. Like that kind of
exactly. Yeah. But like it can also be used as a cutting insult to someone. it's one of those things where tone is a big part of it.
Definitely. This was mostly from my siblings, so it was mostly teasing, or it was a death match because that's what sibling life is like. The next few bits I thought were pretty standard. There's a section on role, so as somebody pointed out in the chat, it is more like you get a social role alongside with the character background kit thing. There's of course then weapon proficiencies, non-weapon proficiencies. Then there's the pretty standard, what is the sort of character class and where do the proficiency groups kind of fall within that. And then this is something I wanted to highlight though, which is finally each entry includes forbidden proficiencies, which may not be chosen by members of the kit initially. For example, a desert rider is not allowed to take the swimming proficiency at the onset. Waves of sand are more familiar to ocean swells. However, if the player can later show a reason for acquiring the proficiency, in this case, perhaps a long sea voyage, then the DM may allow it. Fun fact, I can't swim. Because
I think there's some interesting flavor here, and part of it is the like old D&D approach of yes and no lists, hard yes no lists. I think like the idea of like, hey, you were this proficiency, these are the skills you are likely to have, these are the skills you are unlikely to come across. However, if you want to create cool backstory for why you would have that skill, neat. And I think that's kind of what's hinted at here, though, in more like older D&D language, which is cool. Like, I'm not going to critique it for being the product of its mechanical time. I think that's a cool way to like encourage people to get creative with their backstories.
Yeah, I concur.
I think looking as someone who's really only played a 5th edition, I'm happy that kits have moved on to just being backgrounds and other things, and that simplification I feel just helps streamline the game and make it easier to create a character and level up.
Yeah, as someone who has also only played 5th edition, really, I find this a bit overwrought. I also, I mean, do we even need to say that it's problematic that there are a couple of classes that are restricted by gender? I don't feel like we should have to say that, but just wanted to make sure it got mentioned there. And to have it specifically gendered. I would say a wise woman, kind of, yeah.
I would say that in this context, yes, but I don't think that's, I think there are certain situations where if you're trying to do a specific cultural thing honestly and properly, there might be times where like including gendered restrictions on culture based on like replicating your real world cultural experiences is a necessary thing, especially in like if you're talking about your own culture. But yeah, in the context of D&D, which is a game that doesn't specifically do that type of cultural role play, that's not the thing you need.
Yeah, and the idea is for anyone to be able to make the character that they want to play, and it replaces an unnecessary restriction.
Yeah, and I think it's more about basically making sure that those restrictions are table created and table accepted rather than a book telling you how you should do this.
So yeah, continuing on. Again, this is more of a sort of an introduction to how each of the character kit sections are laid out. So the next few sections that each one has is equipment, special benefits, magical abilities. Now we're into the next page. Special hindrances that they get, which and also wealth options. But I did want to highlight, speaking of the problematic aspects of the section on races. I don't know if we've gotten too much in this stream about having sort of the D&D races to start with, but also the way sort of D&D has approached all these races and how that interacts here.
I think we might have early on when they had introduced it.
Yeah,
there was a paragraph a few episodes back where they basically said that like a lot of the in-game racial prejudices don't exist in the same way in Zahara, so against like orcs and things like that, and which we highlighted as a minor silver lining of like, oh, surprising and nice.
Except they did switch it,
and then they contradicted
they said
it later.
If instead of what is it, I might be misremembering it, a dwarf who has like a racial bonus against fighting orcs or something now is goblins and something else.
Yeah, they basically moved it to monstrous races, which is still, I believe, still a concept back here, right? Like the
Yeah.
races of creatures that are specifically almost always exclusively monsters, and so those bonuses were moved to like monster hunting those specific creatures.
It was
Yeah.
substituted for Zakharan appropriate monsters.
Let me quickly read this paragraph then, because I think that will frame this discussion a little bit more. So, quote, races. If a certain race is prohibited from taking a kit or tends to avoid it, that's noted here. Most kits, however, are available to all PC races in the Land of Fate. Zakharans are more tolerant of racial differences than many foreigners. As a result, elves, dwarves, halflings, and gnomes are all part of the mosaic of Zakharan culture. They are not segregated as they are in other lands. Yeah, so that's kind of the rules from Chapter 2 of Player's Handbook still apply, however, so a given race may be prevented from belonging to some character classes. Which again is kind of like it's like a step back and two backwards. It's or say step forward.
It
Shot.
feels like they're trying to do both things. Like they're trying to appease the sort of like traditional ideas of D&D where like, you know, certain races couldn't play certain classes and stuff like that, but also trying to somehow act like they're being more progressive in this specific setting, but then not doing it anyway. So it just doesn't work. But then again, we don't know how that's come up yet because we haven't read the specific kits, but yeah.
I think that if you want to use racism in your story, then you kind of take a stance on it rather than jump about and confuse the DM or the player. So it's like either racism is a thing and this is how, or racism isn't a thing and this is how. And you don't even need to describe why it's not a thing if you choose not to make it, because you can. But they did say here that they don't have any segregation. But as mentioned, they did earlier say that you might find like a gnome part of town or a halfling street or something like that. So I think in the introduction, it would have been far simpler to simply state, this is how racism works, whether it exists or not. So that kind of would clear it up.
Yeah.
The huge content warnings for that section, definitely. Okay, any further thoughts on this, or we can move ahead to some reflections on what we got through today? We got through section, everybody. We did it.
We did.
Yeah.
I think I have thoughts on this, but I'm holding off until we've read the kits and see how this manifests and see just how often they restrict a race's ability to play a class. It should be not at all, but I'm interested to see how often it does come up in both terms of race and gender.
I mean, it's a common trope of this era of fantasy, right? Like Dragon Age even has like dwarves can't be wizards stuff, and like it's Dragon Age has a lot of other bad things, but as much as I love that series. But like that's a common trope. I bring that Dragon Age up as an example because that is pretty emblematic of the fantasy landscape at the time, and to an extent now, like the fantasy landscape has changed a bit, mostly as a result of player agency rather than as a result of challenging racism for the most part, if we're being honest. But that was a huge thing when there was a bigger emphasis, especially in the D&D landscape and in TTRPGs, of like trying to simulate a functioning world. There are parts of this book that fail at that, but like the races only being allowed to do certain kits is part of trying to an attempt to simulate culture or racial backgrounds and how that might interact with the world that has a lot of problematic elements, but that's how it gets there.
And notably, both Dragon Age and D&D borrow heavily from Tolkien's writings, and that's probably where a lot of those in-world racial prejudices come from, is the depictions there. And
the general understanding of Christianity as the sort of template for culture, right? European Christianity, Western Christianity as how culture works everywhere, and culture tends to be filtered through that framework.
I do think that racism is a big part of any fantasy world you might write. Now, how it's, when I say big parts, that's very broad. So you could implement it in different ways, but however you do it, it should be, it should have be a way to represent history in the world. So these two races perhaps don't like each other because they were at war for so long, and not just because these are good or these are evil. And this is more of a comment on just all fantasy content.
At that point, it becomes a culture thing, not a race thing, right? Like it's this
Yeah.
people of the city and people of this city don't like each other because
Yeah.
of history of war, and the cities don't have to be homogeneously one race. Looking at you,
Correct.
Warhammer.
Yeah, I mean, the,
And-
ethnic group conflicts are long-standing, and they don't necessarily need to be along racial lines. So, yeah, sorry, Mariam, please.
Oh, I was going to say, and that's partially why whenever I do any writing, I make sure that any conflicts that arise are between communities and try not to have it based on racial or any sort of thing that is
Bioessentialist.
bioessentialist and an identity that you can't change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So it's a reflection thing. I honestly think
Reflections,
it's probably
yes.
our most positive episode we've had yet. I feel
It's
like we
true.
could say that.
Yeah.
Pretty. There was a lot of. Oh, good.
Go ahead. I was
Okay.
going to say that I do enjoy the naming section and the pronunciation guide, and also several examples and ideas of constructing a surname. I really do appreciate, like, it is one of the bigger silver linings so far that we've come across, and I'm happy that that's there.
Yeah.
Yep.
I concur.
I think this section actually, like, and most of what we talked about this episode can serve as a really solid template, especially the name section, on how to ground your fantasy world building in real world culture in a respectful way. I think the name section is really strong because it draws directly from real world elements and language in naming and transplants them one to one. And while, what did we do before then? That was.
And we started with the stations.
Yeah, stations is an example of attempting to replicate a real world perceived things, dropping any of the cultural baggage that might make it that way, and thus doing harm through it. And the sort of like middle ground is like when you're writing a game like this, sometimes you just gotta say like, okay, if we're gonna talk about names, it is easy to draw on real world naming connections and include those. And then when building fantasy elements, use the real world grounding stuff as your basis and extrapolate from there, rather than just go off of what you think is going to happen.
Yeah, that's, I think, a really good rule of thumb for people who are looking to write things like this. Any other reflections on what we've had today? Or we can move on to closer.
I think for me, the stations part is something that you can do as an optional thing or as a background thing, just as keep it simple and relevant to the story. Like everyone else, I did really like the naming, and one thing that I wish might even be available here is name meanings, because they are a big part of naming tradition in every culture. Is the meaning of the name does carry some weight, so that is something that also would be nice to see in really any book. I always like to know, okay, what does that name mean? And
Give your character a name that reflects them in some way.
Yeah.
I was about to
yeah.
I was about to talk about that, of like the first names. It would be nice to have a meaning attached to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a really good point, actually, because I mean, for example, my name means builder, and as I've like throughout my life, I've developed a deeper and a newer understanding of what that means in my life, and that's been really important to me, sort of thinking about my own existence narratively. And so that's a really good point I hadn't even thought of. That's yeah, having meanings of the names would be fantastic.
I'm going to be honest, I'm glad they aren't here because every one of their translations so far has made me hurt a little. I
Fair
don't
point.
know if I would want their name translation list.
But that
That's
means
fair.
when you write one, or Sophia, you can add those in there.
Yeah, I know that whenever I make a RPG character, I like to give them a name that I feel like has some meaning or relevancy to that character and who they are and their story and everything.
I
So
often
it
name them
would be
bad
nice to see it if it was done well.
Yeah, or even like something that of what their family expected them to be and not how
Yeah.
they turned out. That's a fun thing to play with.
I often name them bad puns in another language, in Arabic. So,
I'm
so
getting
anyone who-
flashbacks of
to
your
my work.
character.
And anyone who listens to my work or can reads my work and can speak Arabic will get bad inside jokes.
Amazing. Well, that seems as good a segue as any to go into some sign-off introductions, or not introductions, just any plugs you have. Tell us where people can find you and your amazing work, and we'll start with Iza, please.
Hello, I am Iza. If you want to find more of the things that I do, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube at Evil Clever Dog. I am a cosplayer and a designer, fabricator, craftsperson. I make YouTube videos about making cool things. So if you are interested in that, then go check out my videos. They're all linked to my Twitter, or my YouTube channel is also Evil Clever Dog. I'm also a TTRPG streamer. I currently stream on Mondays on Chromatic Chimera with No Initiative, playing in Quest the Soaring City, which is a really fun campaign where we're sort of like dealing with the aftermath of a revolution in this flying city, and it's great fun. So come join us if you're interested in that. I also stream Pokemon Storm Silver with my friends Finn and Nat on Wednesdays on Finn's channel, twitch.tv/FinnTheBin. And then I've got some other stuff in the works. Pretty soon I'm going to be a part of an Aegon podcast. More information on that to come soon. And yeah, other things I can't really talk about yet. Is it because I'm mysterious, or is it because I can't? Is it because it's not formulated enough to talk about yet? Who knows?
You're stealing my lines, and I see you.
Yeah. But yeah, that's where to go if you want to find more of my stuff.
Safia, please. And thank you so much for joining this time.
And thank you for having me. I'm Safia Dajan, and I'm actually going to be launching a blog on my community's website that will be focusing in general tabletop topics, but in specific tabletop roleplay games within the Middle East. And that's going to start with my area of focus of Saudi, but build into other communities as I reach out and find more people and try to talk more about tabletop gaming in the region.
Oh, wonderful. Mariam, please.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. And the two things I am super, super excited to talk about is, one, the Musafirs podcast, season 2 is coming back. And Ammar is also joining, coming back. We have a new cast with our other Al-Qadim castmate who's joining as a new team member, Adam Ali, as well as Charu and Viditya, and we are recording our first AMA tomorrow. So if you have any burning questions about what the Musafirs is doing, tweet at me or tweet our Musafirs Twitter account, which is the Musafirs Pod. And the second thing I am super excited to talk about is that Utopia will be back early March with a whole new bunch of shows, and a lot of returning shows as well. And I'm not going to talk about that too much because we're going to have an official rollout and everything soon. But I'm excited to see what Kahania Season 2 does, which is the game that I run in Surname, and this time instead of Quest, we're running it in Monster of the Week. So it's going to be interesting.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, wow, you've got a lot going on there. Ammar, please, where can people find you?
Hi, I'm Ammar Amaraz. You can find me everywhere on the internet at Amaraz. Like all my other character names, there is a in-joke for Arabic speakers in my name that I will not explain. Other than that, I'm going to repeat my mysterious lines because I honestly don't have a lot that I can talk about right now. I'm doing game design stuff. There's a couple of things we're working on, Nope. I can't talk about that either. Yeah, so I got stuff in the right. I've got like 2 or 3 or 4 writing projects that I'm working on, rolling out announcements for soon. I've got like 2 free podcast or stream stuff that I'm working on announcements for soon, and other stuff just mysteriously in the background. So keep an eye on that. Yeah, that's it. That's all I got. Can't give you more.
Oh God, you're so mysterious.
So
I know.
Mysterious. My name is, of course, Ammar. You can find me at Ammar Ijaz mostly on Twitter, and it's just underneath my video here. I'm one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent. I'm also one of the cast members of Dungeons and Asians, which I believe we'll be recording a new session of that soon. So look forward to that. I believe also I've been asked to let everybody know that the Cyberpunk series on Wednesdays that everybody loves so much has been extended for at least 2 more episodes. So watch for that as well. You can also catch a replay of this stream, the Al-Qadim Critical Read stream, on the Asians Represent YouTube channel. Easiest way is to just search for Asians Represent there. And you can also find the previous versions there. Please join us next month. We're doing this on the 3rd Saturday of every month until presumably we all die, but hopefully we'll be able to get through it sooner than that. And I believe the next one is on March the 20th. So please join us at 12 Eastern Standard Time, which I believe is it's different times elsewhere in the thing. I was going to try to throw it
Time zone.
Yeah, there's a lot of time zones, but it's at 12 EST and it's on March 20th. So please join us then. In the meanwhile, please take care of yourself, wear masks, and stay physically distanced, but not emotionally.